And it's a good thing I put on some lipstick. I did actually have a Zoom call just before this, and I have a book club thing just after this. So we lucked
That's
out.
what you're like, let me be prepared. What's funny is I remember last year, or the year before, I was invited to do a podcast interview, and I assumed it was only going to be audio. So thankfully I brushed my hair and I put on a clean pair of pajamas, but it ended up being video as well. I was like, oh my God.
I've done that, and that would have happened today if I didn't have those two other things going on, because I was assuming this is going to be audio. So if I didn't have something else, I would have been we would have had to reschedule, because I'm not I'm not ready for public consumption on normal days.
Especially in nowadays, right? Stay at home, like it could be in anything that you're at home with. But I'm glad you put lipstick on. You look lovely.
Thank you. So do you. And the one before this was this little thing I did with a bunch of authors, which was like a bedtime stories thing. So it was almost like this telephone thing where you get a paragraph from this 12 of us were doing it, and you only get to see the paragraph from the person before you, and then you continue the story and the next person only sees yours. And so we read it for the first time live. It was so much fun, but we were supposed to wear pajamas. So, well, okay.
It sounds like such a fun exercise for authors. It's just like, what a way to boost your creativity and then come with this amazing story.
It's amazing what ends up, because everyone's style is a little different. So to give you an idea, we started off with this ballet dancer doing her final performance, and we ended up somehow with it being a time travel where Benjamin Franklin shows up. It was so fun. I laughed so much. It was just bizarre. It was so much fun.
That reminds me of back in my childhood, the ad libs. Do you remember we used to like, and then Mad Libs and things like that. So thank you for sharing that. But Sonali, thank you again for your time. Let me introduce you to who I am, because you have no idea. And I'm so grateful that even still you accepted my invitation. So I'm Aisha Iqbal, and I'm a full-time marketing executive here in Silicon Valley. I work at an advertising agency, but on the side, I am just fulfilling my heart's passion in everything. I published a book like 2 years ago. It was like a personal memoir that I did. And that act in itself unlocked just everything for me. That was like the scariest thing I could do. And then after that, I was just like, now what can I start? So that's led me to now I'm a life coach for moms. I'm starting this podcast. I've been doing my personal branding journey, and I love, love, love writing. So I've been practicing that through blog articles, posts, and whatnot. And this idea for the podcast came to me last year. I just knew that I wanted to speak and do storytelling and just do all of this on any medium that I can. And then I also realized that there's not enough voices in the podcast realm that are like mine. 40-something-year-old South Asian American woman, mother, whatnot. And I was just like, well, why not? And also because my life coaching, it's really the premises. My program is called What's Next, Mama? And I help mothers really explore, like, okay, I'm a mom, but what else? What else can I be? What else can I do? So this is me embodying my principle in that. And so my specific podcast right now, it's really just about talking about things that are important to all of us. Like today's topic is on love. And especially during times like this where all of us are under different levels of stress, different levels of anxiety, I thought it would be good to remind everyone about love and the different forms of love and why it's important. And why I specifically reached out to you was because this part of the podcast is going to be 3 different episodes, like different perspectives on love. And when I saw your books, and you know, you are a self-proclaimed Bollywood love story writer, and I grew up on Bollywood, so I know what those love stories are. I was like, I absolutely want that perspective to be shown here as well. So thank you so much again for accepting the invitation.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me. And I mean, it's great. First, you don't look anywhere near 40, so that's
I'm turning 42 in 2 weeks. Wow. So
you're doing really good.
Thank you. I really thank my parents for the genes that they've blessed us all with.
Yeah, no, they have. You should. Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's great. I mean, we do want more voices like ours, like yours, in all realms. So that's great.
Thank you. So what I typically start off with is I would like for you, in your own words, to introduce yourself and what you do, and then I will follow that up with kind of a ridiculous question to then start our discussion with. So if you don't mind kicking us off, who are you and what are you known for?
So I'm Sonali Dev, and I write books that I think of as stories of women around the world and how we navigate, navigate social restrictions, how we navigate the tightrope between personal freedom and the responsibilities and the duties that being part of a community thrust upon us. So so stories that that let me explore issues that women face around the world, but also let me indulge my faith in a happily ever after, right? So this idea that any stories that explore either the South Asian experience or the female experience need to be dark is, has been the traditional narrative. And I think for me, to have fun with that, to have stories that have voices like ours, that are, that are fun, that let us have agency, that let us be ridiculous, make mistakes, and still, find happiness and joy. That's kind of the stories that I'm interested in, because that's the kind of life I feel everyone is interested in. And I mean, I love to say, no one wakes up in the morning and kind of thinks, how can I be miserable today? I mean, literally everybody wakes up in the morning and thinks, how can I be happy? And yet when you write stories about that yearning and that wanting to be happy, there's somehow, considered either commercial or considered, less in some way, which I think is ridiculous. So that's what I do. So I write I write love stories, but they're very much set in in these really tight-knit families. And so it's stories of women finding their place in their community and their world. And I have my handy dandy prop here. This is the book that comes out on May 26th. So I'm currently neck deep in promoting Recipe for Persuasion. So what I'm doing right now, and this was a lifelong dream that I'm kind of baffled is actually, has come to fruition, is I always wanted to, so I'm a huge Jane Austen fan, and I always wanted to kind of write stories that pay homage to her, inspired by her four novels that are my favorite four novels of hers, and which is Pride and Prejudice, Persuasion, Sense and Sensibility, and Emma, which are her four most popular novels. And I always wanted to kind of do each one of those as a separate novel, but under one series or under one story umbrella. So I had this grand idea since I was very young, that this is what I wanted to do. And I think, like all dreamers, when we dream the dream, it's not really real, right? I mean, you think, oh, this would be so great. But until it happens, it's almost like there's a little bit of disbelief, right? That's why there's wonder when it happens. but it was always my dream for that to happen. And my first one was Pride, Prejudice, and Other Flavors, and now Recipe for Persuasion, and I have 2 more coming up for the other 2. So it's kind of such a dream come true. And essentially, this is a spin on Persuasion, but the entire series is set in the Bay Area, in a politically ambitious Indian American family that's descended from royalty, and their oldest son is running for California governor. So the 4 books are set during that campaign. That's the overall arc.
So then I actually need to go back, because I pre-ordered the Recipes for Persuasion. So now, because it's a series, I will have to go back and get the first one then as well.
I would very much like you to.
I'm sure.
Big surprise, but it's but they do stand alone. So you could just read Recipe for Persuasion and you would be just fine. So it's not the stories are standalone stories, but there is a world arc that kind of you follow through all of the books, but it's not essential. There's no part that you have to know or that needs to get resolved from one book to the next.
So Sonali, you are then the best person for me to ask this question of, what is the big deal about love? What is it about love that drives people just crazy?
Well, that's a really interesting thing, because I mean, does it really drive us crazy? It fuels us more than anything else, or it gives us whatever joy there is to be had in the world, right? I mean, I don't really think this whole idea that love has to be crazy is I mean, it's interesting, but is it really crazy to want the things that go with what you just said, right? I mean, when you say it drives us crazy, I think what you really mean is it wants us to be happy. It drives us toward wanting to feel good about ourselves. And if you wanted to turn it into into, I don't want to say man-woman love, because that's not what I mean, but into non-platonic, love, then I think all of that comes from our need to feel good about ourselves, our need to be seen, the way we want to be seen, right? I think that that's a very, very essential and very natural instinct we have as humans with our developed brain. We want to be seen a certain way, and I think when we have this whole I met this person and there was magic, whether it is friendship or it is someone you fall in love with, what that experience essentially is, oh my gosh, what that experience essentially is the experience of feeling that spark because you're seen the way you want to be seen, as in the eyes or in the in the reactions of this other person. So I think the real journey, when we talk about finding the person, finding love, all of that, the real journey is finding a form of ourselves that we find lovable enough that it can manifest in someone else's reaction to us. So it's really more complicated than just your heart. I mean, of course you have a physical reaction, but I don't think you could have a very desirable physical reaction to someone if they didn't see you in a way that you want to be seen or you crave to be seen. So it really is this very personal journey, really, which makes us all sound like narcissists, but it also makes us want to be a better person, which is where the narcissism disassociates from it. So yeah, I mean, I think that's what it is. That's the reason people like to read love stories. That's the reason, at the heart of anything. I mean, when you watch whether you're watching a movie, whether you're watching a TV show, we always think in terms of, does it have soul, right? I mean, you can watch something that someone spent millions of dollars making and has these fabulous production values and this great acting. But we've all watched those things where you walk away from it thinking, this didn't touch me, right? And that touching comes from how that storyteller explored love. Whether it was just a spark, like a little something, you just need a little something depending on what genre it is. But I think that's when you're giving anything meaning, it has to come from a place of love, right? I mean, I there's stories are told for two reasons. There's two motivations really in this world, and one is love and the other is money, and and so even with money, anyone who is hungry for money is also really hungry for safety or for feeling good, right? And the hunger for money is about something else. It's not just that number. And I think and somewhere you can trace that back to love again. Either you felt unsafe in your childhood and so money gives you safety, or or wherever. Every other need, I think, is based in this thing that we call love. So it's pretty much everything.
So it's essentially the driver of humanity, right? And I like what you were saying about that magic that is felt, and it's not just in love relationship, man-woman love, but any relationship, that magic is felt when essentially we are accepted, or our version of ourselves is reflected in the other person. And you're right, that is narcissistic in a way, because it's kind of selfish, like, oh, the way I see myself, you see me that way as well, rather than us accepting how we are showing up to other people and how they see us, right? Because there's kind of a love there too. We need to have enough self-love for ourselves to accept other people's perception of us and be okay, whether it matches what we think or doesn't.
That's one way of looking at it, but if you even dig deeper into that, it's all perspective, right? Everybody's looking at you and seeing you based on who they are. And so that's where the magic comes in, is who I want to be seen as. We have to be at this place where you're able to see me that way. And I'm, so it really is, if that were true, if it really was about who you were being, and I don't mean to just take the responsibility off us, that's a separate conversation. But if that were it, then when I meet you and how you see me, and I meet X person and how they see me, wouldn't be so different. It really has to do with much more than just that, right? I mean, the same action, the same smile, it can be completely interpreted differently based on what that other person is going through. And that's where the magic is, that you are two people who are in this place, in your own lives, in the universe's life, where that connection happens. And this is absolutely true of friends. This is true of parent-child, right? I mean, your relationship with even your children changes over time based on who you are, who they're becoming. So love is really about where each person is in their life, and so I think another way of looking at it is, we've all been in a place where we really badly want to find someone, right? I mean, the search for the one is something we've all experienced at some point. And I've seen that there is something with that search that has to do with whether you're ready to let that into your life or not. I mean, we all have the friends who are like, I don't understand why I can't find someone, right? And sometimes we can understand because, honey, you're not ready, or and it's not just as obvious as self-sabotage, but it is just being in that place when you really want it, or you're really vulnerable to it, or so it's much deeper than just just saying, oh, XYZ matches. I mean, naturally we're not algorithms, but but there's there's that readiness that has to be there. You have to be in the right place, and I think that's why I think that people make falling in love about the other person, but it really is entirely a inward and selfish journey. So if that makes sense.
As much sense as it can make for love, right? And it's because you're right, it is so much more than that. And with that, I want to ask, how is Bollywood love, Bollywood's version of love, the same or different? Because if we look at how love is portrayed in those movies like Devdas, right? The crazed in love man who just spends the rest of his life drowning in alcohol because he couldn't get the love of his life, or the deep love that we have in the friendships that are shown in movies like Sholay, right? That is just like those two, they ride or die with each other. And then pick any movie where we've seen the love of a mother for her child, like she will go to the ends of the earth for her children. So the Bollywood love that I have seen since childhood is deep and it's passionate. It's almost extreme. But is that different from how everyday traditional love is?
I think first, Bollywood is this two-pronged concept, right? I mean, it is and my apologies to people in Bollywood who don't like that term being used. I completely understand. But let's assume that we're using that term in with utmost respect. Not assume, we are using the term with utmost respect, but it is really, in my mind, a style, right? It is a storytelling style. And so in that there is a heightened, like the opera is, right? I mean, your emotions as a reader or as an audience member have to be raised to a certain place, right? That's kind of the aim of this particular style, is where it hits you in the feels, right? That's what we're going for. And all storytelling tries to hit you in the feels. The Bollywood style traditionally isn't subtle about it. It's not apologetic about it, is what I would say. So if you're feeling a feeling, you're going to feel it, right? In terms of showing it, right? You're painting it in red if it's anger. And so, which doesn't mean it's melodrama. Melodrama happens when you're painting it red in anger, when there's kind of no real reason or motivation to be enraged. So really, it's not, I don't want to call it melodramatic, it's just very visible, right? So the punch has to hit hard. So I don't think that the feelings themselves are any different, but there's no shying away. As in terms of a storytelling style, there's nowhere for you to hide. It's right there. So there is and I think in terms of communication, as a South Asian, culture, we tend not to, it's this dichotomy, because as a culture we are, there are things that you don't speak of, and there's secrets and stuff. The things that you do speak of, and love is one of, like, affection in families and things like that, we don't, the style is to not beat around the bush. So even as as immigrants, when we move to the West, so to speak, we have to learn to translate ourselves and soften that when we interact, right? Otherwise we would just be seen as crazy. And I'm always also fascinated by that. So if you see a Bollywood star, or if you see an Indian star of any sort, or an Indian person who lives in India doing an interview, say, with a journalist from the West, it's really, really interesting to see, because that entire act of translating yourself has not become internalized to people who live in India. And so when that happens, it's really obvious how so much of the humor or the emotion or what they're communicating is kind of, lost, and that this thing happens because immigrants, or people who are born and raised here, there's just this automatic taking on of the environment. And I think that one of those things that is different is the clarity with which we're able to show emotion, even though we think we're not doing it. I mean, there's even in traditional families where there's not a whole lot of hugging and kissing, and there's still this, I will leave no doubt that I love you, my son. Like, there is we're not leaving that to doubt. And I think that naturally translates into that style of storytelling. So it's definitely, I mean, between Viru and Jay and Sholay, it's that, that friendship. And also there's no escaping that friendship. It's absolute. And now we all have friendships like that, but and they're not always great to each other. I mean, they make fun of each other. It's all, it's in no way unbelievable, which is one of the reasons that movie endures, is that it's so relatable, even though it's so heightened, right? And so the only thing is in how focused that love is. And our storytelling just focuses really hard. Now, Devdas is not one of my favorite stories, because dying for love is not heightened love to me. It's not even love. So that whole thing, I mean, if you're going to drink yourself to death because you couldn't get the person that you wanted, that person, for one, is better off rid of you. But there's more to that story, I know. But it is... But the point is, even with that story, even if I don't agree with it, there's the lens is very intensely focused on emotion. And I think that, that's just a stylistic thing. I don't know if the emotions themselves are different, but it's a lens or a brush that is different.
I'm going to stick with the Bollywood theme, even for the next question. So I remember I was young when I watched Kabhi Kabhi. I love that movie.
My favorite movie. Can we just talk about Kabhi Kabhi for the rest of this?
Talk about Kabhi Kabhi. I mean, talk about love in every form in that movie. And even when I was young, it still hit me hard. I did not understand. I really just didn't understand why Amitabh and Rakhi, why they couldn't marry. And her wedding day, her wedding night, she's singing the song, Amitabh's poetry. She's singing it to her new husband. And my next question is around, we hear that it's better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all. And I don't know. I mean, I do understand it conceptually, because love is just an amazing experience to just have had. But when I still think about Kabhi Kabhi, and I still think about Rakhi, she never fell out of love with Amitabh. The rest of her life, she was still in love with him. Amitabh was still in love with her. Shashi Kapoor, we have to imagine that he felt that his wife never truly loved him wholly, not as much as he did. And what effect did that have on her children, right? So that's how I'm thinking about this, that there was a lack there in terms of love, because she still held love for Amitabh. So that's from that perspective.
I have a whole different take on that, but I'll let you come to the question.
Please tell me, if in that frame, is it better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all?
Okay, first I'm going to step back to what I think, and weirdly enough, Kabhi Kabhi is in this book, is in Recipe for Persuasion, because one of the things that I was trying to do, so the original story of Persuasion, Jane Austen's Persuasion, is that a girl is persuaded is persuaded to walk away from love because of familial pressure, because her family deems this man not worthy of their name and therefore her name. But since this is, a very patriarchal society, it was their name that really mattered. And so she gets persuaded into that. And then the story is, 10 years later, whenever he kind of makes something of himself and comes back, how they find their way back to this thing they had walked away from. So that's the original persuasion story. And in my book, I kind of was, of course, that's the thing. This girl is persuaded out of her high school love. And, now the tables have kind of turned, and she's trying to save her father's restaurant in Palo Alto. And so as a last ditch effort to do that, she goes on a Food Network show called Cooking with the Stars, which is like Dancing with the Stars, but with chef and celebrity pairs. And the celebrity she gets stuck with is this man that in high school she was persuaded to dump. And he's gone on to become a World Cup winning football player. And he's recently retired, and he's the celebrity she gets stuck with. So it is kind of their second chance story. But really what I wanted to play with was what these stories like Kabhi Kabhi, stories like Hum Aapke Hain Kaun, what they, and I adore both films for many different reasons. But really these stories that we as South Asian and Indian women grew up with is this sense that that there is sanctity to marriage, that once you're married, you will automatically find happiness if you basically what is the word? Not comply. What is the word I'm looking for? If you basically, give it a chance, you're going to find happiness. So what those stories teach us, or the social message of that story, and in my opinion, the brainwashing message for women is that, your elders, the others in your life, the men in your life, know what's better for you than you do. And that there is this whole marriage, the bandhan, right, of shadi, will somehow automatically bring you happiness. So it is ways to take away your agency. And growing up, it always bothered me. So even in Kabhi Kabhi, naturally, that whole concept, because I think what the filmmaker is saying is that, sure, they had this great connection, Amitabh and Rakhi, but when she marries, she is able, because she's a good woman, she is able to then, and she does, she gives her, and we as women have been taught to do this, and we've seen our mothers, our aunts, we've actually seen this happen, each one of us, where you get into this situation and then you make the best of it, right? You give yourself whole. And that's the whole thing that she, and he says it, Shashi Kapoor says it, which is what is lovely about it, is that he is aware that this woman he's married to has not held anything back. And even though she came with baggage, she drops it all. She gives herself fully to this family and this marriage. And he loves her for it, which is kind of what is beautiful about that movie. And she does. She kind of, she has regret and she feels bad about what happens with, with her college sweetheart or her high school sweetheart. But she gives herself fully and then she finds happiness. Right? So that is the story perpetually that we're told. And but the man doesn't, and that's where the patriarchy is. Amitabh Bachchan goes and also marries a lovely woman, but he never lets go of what he didn't get. So he is always operating from a place of privilege, right? That he, having lost once, he refuses to love again. And she, having lost one, goes on to love and makes many and several people happy and has this beautiful family. And he does the opposite. He makes this woman incredibly unhappy because he's never able to do it again. So which is why I think it's such an interesting story that was told back in 1970. And of course, there's that whole adoption thing, though, you know, a girl who chooses to go looking for who she is, and a boy who says, fine, if that's what you need to do, I'll go along, you know, I'll come with you. But nobody stops her from finding. So it was ahead of its time in many ways. But I think the story that we are told, that, you know, if you put your head down and comply with the wishes of others, so compromise, we're taught compromise through these stories, and I'm not really sure I like that. I mean, I'm pretty sure I don't like that. And with this book, the mother, the heroine's mother, so it's a 2-generational retelling of Persuasion, almost, has the exact same thing, where she is from this, you know, royal family, well, related to a royal family, so, you know, they consider themselves highborn or whatever. And she's in love with, you know, with a man who is not of that, you know, doesn't, basically, it's not a man that her father chooses for her. And so she's forced into marrying this guy who is deemed correct for her by her family. And she says, no, you know, you can hold, you know, and they get her to do it because they have things that, you know, they can, because they have power. But she refuses. She refuses to do what Rakhi did. She refuses to put her head down and comply. And she fights. And Ashna, who is the heroine, her daughter, who's the protagonist, is basically the collateral damage of when women take a stand like that. And so the daughter suffers greatly because her mother refuses to comply, because her parents have a god-awful marriage, right? And so there is that whole thing of what happens when a woman says, I will not, I will do what I, you know, I will be who I want to be, I will be with the man I love. And so, you know, of course we pay a price, and that's how we're taught not to do it, because we're told too many people will pay a price, and do you want that on your head? So I think that, you know, that is more about patriarchy than it is really about love at all. And but as far as the having loved and lost thing, I think that I'm not sure it's such a relevant question. I mean, of course everyone should feel. So if you asked me, I mean, most of us don't end up with our first big love, right? And there are many reasons for that. One is you have to be a certain level of stupid, also known as immature, and a child, to be able to give of yourself, to still have that level of vulnerability that it takes to just give of yourself that much, and to fall that, you know, with that big of a threat. And it's happened to all of us before we're able to build our armors when we're very young. And very few of us get to carry that through into adulthood. Our adult relationships naturally are, and probably should be, you know, are smarter, are more tempered, you know. And so, but I would feel really bad for anyone who hasn't felt that kind of, you know, craziness. Does that you know, but life is practical. There is another kind of love that that people in happy long-term relationships have, that comes from a place of you know, everyday of everyday battles, and winning and losing them, and letting go, and, you know. And so that has more to do with comfort. It has more to do with, again, being seen as who you want to see, and the constant be seen as, and that constant battle for that. So I think it's more about that. So I think both those are love, and both those should happen to people. If I had my way, that would be what I distribute to the world.
I love that. And so I also love that you are healing my inner child Bollywood movie scars. So I'm going to ask you to do it again and for this one. So for this
I'm
question,
here for you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. So my next question is around the different types of love. So I have a 3-year-old, almost 4-year-old daughter, and when I became a mother, my heart just changed. The kind of love that I have changed, and it's incredible. So I remember another movie, Aradhana, Rajesh Kumar and Sharmila Tagore. So she's in love with him, but he dies. She's pregnant with his child. She has it, but she's not allowed to raise him as his mother, right? She becomes his nanny or his servant. He never knows that she's his mom until like the very end. That is a sacrifice. That's the kind of sacrifice that I never understood. Again, as a child, I'm like, no, that's her child. Why can't she be his mom? So
I'm so glad you never understood it, because again, these are stories, that almost were there to tell us not to be a bad woman, because if you went out and, God forbid, had sexual pleasure with someone you were attracted to, your life was going to end in awful ways, because he would die and then you would be pregnant and then you'd have to be a servant to your own baby. So, but it's such a snapshot of what our society was, and what our culture was in this like post-colonial, highly repressed world. And I feel very much like all of these stories, all these little things that we were shown and taught as little girls were all kind of like, toe the line, don't feel sexual pleasure, don't feel attraction, like, all of those
things. Was it not about the deep love of a mother and the sacrifices that she's willing to make for her child?
I mean, do you have to make a sacrifice to be a good mom? That's what you're taught, right? I mean, constantly.
Bless you for saying that. I think you should repeat that one more time for everyone who did not hear.
I will. Do you have to sacrifice to love your kids? I mean, it's lovely you have so she's 3, you said 4?
She's 3 turning 13. I think COVID has like matured her in ways that I could not have imagined.
But Mama, I'm here to tell you, as a mom of 2 adult children, that you have good times ahead.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and a mother's love is not always singing arias. It's often like, what was I thinking? And I kid. They're lovely, but yeah, no, they'll want you to sacrifice your young at some point. I'm I'm joking, but really, like, does it have to be tinged with pain to be worth it? I mean, it's painful enough having children. I mean, man, when they make stupid decisions and you have to watch them hurt, all of that is painful enough without me having to have lost my life and be their nanny, because we are their nanny anyway. But having said that, I think Aradhana, now it's all of like, this was it was traumatic growing up, having to see all of this, right? And it did do its work. Like it was, and for the 30 years of my life, at least, I've been trying to uncondition this crazy conditioning that all of this has, it's like tentacles in my DNA. It's like having to peel it off you is so hard. And it was because that's what you're told, like over and over again, like a misstep will cost you your life. No, missteps don't cost you your life. Missteps are life. And I wish that time was spent teaching us that any misstep, you're going to be fine, right? But that's not what, because if you taught that to everybody, who has power then, right? If everybody found out that they could just follow their good conscience and or bad conscience and live with the consequences. There was this big fear, like my mom would say this, and my mom is is absolutely like not a patriarchal mom, but she would say, what will happen of society then, and they would say things like, yeah, and then people won't be married and everybody will be running around with illegitimate children. And today we're like, and like, what does that even mean? Like, what is legitimacy? Is a marriage certificate legitimacy? And so I love that our world is now, at at a place where people should do the right thing because it's the right thing, not because it's a social rule. And so that's kind of, and that's what stories are. It's teaching, it's teaching us who we want to be. It help, it's us exploring, because who we are, you and I, it's these stories that we watched when we were young, and how we processed that, and whether we wanted to either be wanted to either rebel against them, or if we wanted to be that person. And so it was just I think that so much of that was just training. and it was not always the right training. So for what it is, it has beautiful songs that Adna does.
I've been trying to stop myself from like singing them right now, like even Kabhi Kabhi, like the songs just come out. I guess that's a version of love that's just like those tentacles I don't mind in my brain, for sure.
And all of it is not bad. I mean, mother's love is consuming, and those parts of it are not bad. It's just that in all of these stories, women are the ones who suffer. You always suffer. Like there's actually, I think the movie is called Suffer, which means journey, not suffer. Right. But I think, and I might be mixing the name up, I don't think I am, and it's the story of this husband who cannot get a hold of his suspicious nature. So he's married to this gorgeous woman, and he's continuously suspicious of anytime she so much as looks at another man, this guy can't handle it, and in the end they break up, and he's miserable. So that's great. That's probably the only Hindi movie I can think of in which a man does something wrong and he's miserable. So he kind of is miserable, but everybody's miserable. It's not just, but otherwise a lot of these old stories were, a whole lot of misery, unless you were like Rakhi in Kabhi Kabhi, and you said, I refuse to be miserable, and then everybody is happy. So the onus of not being miserable is on us.
It's the choices that we make. So then, Sonali, to end this conversation, what would the world look like to you without love?
Again, I don't even think such a thing is possible, because I mean, what does that question even mean, right? Is it possible for us to, what does that mean? Like, what would there be? I'm not I'm not saying that love is everything, but it's just the core of us. So what would even, what would that even be? I think that we are, as humans, going to constantly redefine what that means. And and maybe as mothers, we will redefine it as not meaning sacrifice in a traditional sense. Maybe as as adults, we are going to be able to redefine it as not being the same love as when you were 13 or 18. So we, I mean, as our consciousness grows, and as we're exposed to more and more, we might redefine what it is. But I don't think that humanity could really be without love. There's just no way. I mean, if that did happen, maybe then we would, live in a world with no wars, no feelings, nothing. I mean, I don't know. We would be furniture. I don't know. Just
IKEA furniture, no love.
I mean,
Yeah, when I thought about asking that question, I asked that question of myself, like, what would the world look like to me if there was no love? And at first, it made me a little hopeful, and I'll explain why. Because I thought, if we think of yin and yang, right? One has an opposite. If there is no love, then maybe there's no hate, then there's no war, there's no abuse, there's no violence. But then I spoke to a friend of mine and was reminded that hate isn't necessarily the opposite of love,
it's
right?
It's not the opposite of love. Yeah.
It would be apathy. It would be apathy. Lack of.
Yes.
So there could still be wars. There could still be violence because there's hate fuels that rather than lack of feeling or apathy. And so then I had to go back to the drawing board. I was like, okay, I guess that's not what the world would look like.
Yeah. And also, I mean, hate is the flip side of love. It may not be the opposite, but it, because we're convinced that our love of our land, or our love of our people, our love of our God, our love of our thing, which is the exact opposite of what all of these things are trying to do. But because we are, again, stories, because what we're taught since we're born is that the things we love are worthy of fighting for. And that's where hate becomes the opposite of love. So, I mean, you might be right. If there is no love, then there are no things to protect, and therefore there is no hatred and war. Might be true. But all of that is moot, because then we wouldn't be humans. And so, then it would be furniture again. So furniture going to war, I guess, is fine. And why would furniture go to war?
And why would furniture go to war?
That's a little ridiculous. But it is, it's it is something. And that's where I mean that we can all, start to reassess what that means, right? And what the stories that we're being taught are saying. What is patriotism? It's a form of love, but how it's being defined and bastardized is a whole, is again, very much part of the same discussion. Why is a certain kind of life important? Because it's important to a few people, because they love what they love. And and so in those terms, it is dangerous to misunderstand love. And a lot of our problems in the world today are from misunderstanding,
and then weaponizing love.
Yeah Weaponizing love is very much the gateway to hate, right? And so,
right. Sonali, I wish you so much luck on your upcoming book. May 26th, it's coming out. And then I thank you so much for indulging my Bollywood side. I feel like you have started the therapy that I needed.
I feel like I dashed a lot of your childhood dreams. I'm so sorry.
No, these are most like nightmares. I would watch these movies and I just would not understand. And I'm like, why is that a thing? Like, why do people have to die for something that is so beautiful? I was like, I don't get it. It just didn't make sense to me.
So you can learn your lessons. No, I mean, I have friends who are like, we don't want to watch stuff with you because you just ruin everything for everyone. Like, I'm ruining it.
I know, it's the storytellers. But Sonali, thank you for your time. I know you're really busy, and thank you again for putting lipstick on. You look amazing.
Thank you. As do you. I do think it was a stroke of luck. But thanks for having me. This was very fun.
This was so much fun. Thank you so much. And I want to stay in touch. I'll keep bothering you.
Please do. No, absolutely. This was fun.
Okay. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Good luck. You too.
Bye.